Right. So, great. I have a question for you, and this relates to not only this issue, but transnational repression more broadly. There's been all the research suggests that the entire world is becoming more authoritarian and has over the last few years. There's really very few bright spots to speak of. And I have a couple of questions related to that. Some of the increased authoritarianism has happened in light of and in context of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is, we're talking about authoritarianism within countries. Have you seen a correlating increase of transnational repression as this authoritarianism has increased within countries, or is there like no correlation at all? And my second question doesn't just relate to China, but sort of there's been these incredible events that have happened over the past 4 years. You had the forcible reabsorption of Hong Kong, you had the withdrawal of the U.S. from Afghanistan, you've had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which these are all sort of massive authoritarian turns. Have you seen spikes in transnational repression that have correlated or corresponded with these events?
So going to your first question, was it about, have we seen an increase in transnational repression within countries? I was a little confused by the phrasing.
No, have you seen an increase of transnational repression that has increased alongside increasing authoritarianism within countries?
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, that's a good question. I do think that as especially around election times and following protest events, there may be a correlation there. I mean, in general, when we look at our database, I think that more and more countries are practicing or perpetrating transnational repression. I mean, some countries like China, Russia, Turkmenistan, their freedoms and democracy ratings, as we have at Freedom House, as they continue to drop, we don't see a concurrent drop in transnational repression cases. We see continued cases, and I don't necessarily think that, I mean, there may be a relation there, but I don't necessarily think that more authoritarianism will signal. The way I would put it is that as crackdowns continue within countries, this may force protesters and dissidents to leave the country, and that repression may simply follow them. I think that's the easiest way of thinking about it. But as you said, in China, there have been several events like the national security law. I highlighted that in my presentation. That has been used as a tool increasingly. I don't know how familiar you are with the bounty cases that were discussed in the summer, where the pro-Beijing authorities in Hong Kong issued bounties against 8 leading figures in UK, Australia, and the UK and the United States. I think that these sort of events, going to your second question, I guess, they do create vulnerabilities for certain diaspora communities. For example, the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine made a lot of communities particularly vulnerable. There, for example, Ukraine hosted a lot of exiles and diaspora communities. And when war hits, that causes a secondary wave of immigration as people try to flee the consequences of the war. And often we've seen that traveling leaves people in a particularly tough spot as they're forced to present documents where their names may come up in databases such as Interpol or something like that. So that increases the likelihood of them being stopped and going through a long and arduous legal processes. So I do think with the invasion of Ukraine, we've seen, Russia's also targeted activists and exiles that have been against the war and have had to flee to neighboring Central Asian countries and Caucasus countries. So yeah, I don't necessarily think COVID has contributed at all to an increase in transnational repression. But again, I would like to emphasize that more and more countries are practicing and finding themselves being recorded in our database as they learn from other countries and use these international linkages and the expansion of authoritarian networks to crack down on activism in their countries and abroad.